Hi everyone, my name is Matt. Welcome to my shop. This is my weekly shop update for February 24th through March 2nd. Now before I get into what's going on here in the shop this week, I wanted to jump back to last week's video because I forgot to mention a very important detail about my bench build, which was flattening it. Last week I talked about how I had finished up all the final touches, making the dead man, making the gap stop, etc. But I never touched on the fact that I actually did flatten the top. The method I used for this was a router sled, which was basically just a plywood box that rode on some rails that were attached to the sides of my bench, and I used the string method to make sure that those rails were perfectly parallel. The string method basically is when you take a piece of string from each corner of the bench in a diagonal, and when they meet perfectly in the middle, that's when you know that your two rails are perfectly parallel and straight. And then using a router that's at a fixed depth, you can ride that whole platform over the whole bench and make that bench a consistently flat surface because you're referencing off those rails. To do the routing, I use a 1.5 inch diameter router bit to go over the whole bench. One thing I'll mention to anyone out there that's going to use this technique for flattening your workbench or any surface for that matter is to make sure you know exactly where the lowest point is on the thing you're flattening. What happened to me was I thought I had the lowest point, so I set my router bit to that depth, but as I got about a third of the way into the routing operation, I found out that, hey, my router bit's not removing any material from this area. This must be the actual lowest spot. So I lowered the router bit again, I went back to the beginning, started routing again. Well, lo and behold, the same thing happened not too much longer down the road. So once again, I lowered my bit even further, went back to the beginning, and started the whole process again. Now granted, that wasn't really that much of a time waste. It didn't take me that long to get to that point. The routing operation goes by pretty quickly. You can really move through the whole surface pretty quickly with a bit that wide. Just to give you an idea of how long it takes to go over the whole bench top with the router, it took me about 15 minutes to go over the whole thing, including my restarts. So obviously if you get it right the first time, it should go a lot faster, probably within 10 minutes. After I did the flattening with the router, I did have some ridges left over, which I then sanded out. I went over the whole bench top with 80 grit and then 120 grit, and it took me about as long to sand the whole bench top as it did for me to route the whole thing flat. But the finish came out really nice. It's very smooth, very flat. And then the last thing I did this week on the bench was I installed the suede on all the dogs and on the chop. So now the bench is completely done and I can finally use it for something. Which brings me to the actual update for this week. This week I've been working on my secretary. This is a project that I started last year. I got the casework completed and then I kind of shelved it and didn't work on it for a while. So I felt pretty motivated to get back into the project again. As I said, I have the casework completed. I started to work on the gallery last year, but to get back into it, I wanted to focus somewhere else. So I started working on the drawers. Now the lumber I used for the drawer fronts is from the biggest cherry tree that I've ever seen. My friend Jim and I do some selective logging at his parents' house, and this is one of the trees that we encountered. When we go out in the woods looking for trees to remove, we look for anything that might be down already or standing dead or heavily damaged that it might not survive or thrive in that area. So this tree fell into that last category. It had half of its limbs removed from the wind, storm, or something. So there was going to be some rot infiltration down through the crotch area of that tree. So we decided to cut it down, and it was a massive tree. The board that I used for this project is 12 feet long, 24 inches wide at the widest part, and about 18 inches wide at the narrowest area. That day was actually a lot of fun. My dad was out there with us as well. He was in town. You can see in the video Jim actually felling the tree, and then my dad and I chained it up to the bobcat and Jim pulled it out of the woods. A few weeks later we had our sawyer come in and do a milling day, and one of the logs that we milled that day was this tree. And you can see in the video the boards being pulled off of that mill. If you ever have the opportunity to have control over the complete project from tree all the way through finished piece, this becomes a much more rewarding experience, and it's a lot more fun to talk about. Because how often do you get to say that, hey, I was the one out there, I found this tree, I cut it down, I pulled the board off the mill, I dried it myself, and I made something out of it. I think that just that alone is so much more rewarding than just saying, oh, I went to the lumber yard, I found this cool piece of wood, and I made something out of it. Not to say that's a bad thing either, but the story and the experience behind actually doing all the other processes yourself, it gives you if anything, it gives you more of an appreciation of the material itself and all the work that goes into that. Because I know from experience that a board does not just come off the tree. There's a lot of work that has to go into taking a log, taking a tree, and coming out with a dried piece of wood that's ready to be worked. So anyway, back to the drawers. I milled up the drawer fronts and all of the drawer parts for my secondary material, which was just some maple I had. And I cut them all to length, and I added the bead around the outside. And at this point, I am working on the dovetails. I have my first one here in the leg vise that I've been working on. I got a few of the pins ready to go, and I'll probably have that joint fitted tonight, and I'll keep going. So just to give you an idea of scale, here is the crotch section of that board. This is about 24 inches wide here, and this is going to become the desk lid. So in a little bit of time that I've been working on the drawers, I've got to experience a little bit more about what this workbench can do for me. And it's definitely an improved way of working. I have a lot more space to work. The bench is a lot more sturdy. And what I really love is the gap stop with the tool holder. Because on my old bench, I would have the tools just scattered all over the place. And I cannot count how many times that I have nicked my hand or just rubbed my hand against the chisel blade because it's just laying on the bench and cut myself. So just having the ability to put them down into the tool area is just an awesome feature to have, and they don't roll away or anything like that, and you know where they all are. The leg vise is really great for clamping things vertically. As you can see here, I've got this 36-inch drawer front clamped vertically in the vise. It's not going anywhere. So that's all the updates I have for this week. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions or comments about anything I talked about in today's video and in my previous videos, or if you have any questions or comments about anything in my shop, please leave those in the comments area. I'd love to hear from you guys, love to hear your feedback. And until next time, as always, happy woodworking.